PLI Vigo. It's fantastic. We started about half an hour ago, and I think it will run and run for the next couple of hours. Now, polls are closing in just under 2 minutes from now. That's when we'll get exit poll results, followed by regularly updated projections. Now, the incumbent Chancellor Olaf Scholz and the Conservative leader Merz were amongst those casting their ballots. Scholz voted at a polling station in his Potsdam constituency in Brandenburg. Merz cast his vote in Niederheimer in North Rhine-Westphalia. Now, turnout so far stands a bit over 50%, which pollsters say is potentially charting towards a higher turnout than previous elections. Now, according to the INSA Polling Institute, the apparently higher turnout is partly due to there being a wider choice of parties across the political spectrum, especially with the rise of the far-right Alternative for Germany and the arrival on the scene of the far-left BSW. Now, let's take a look, first of all, at the parties and their chancellor candidates. Germany's next leader faces, of course, the challenge of reviving an economy that has gone from being Europe's economic engine to, frankly, a laggard. They will also need to deal with the changing global political landscape under U.S. President Donald Trump. His threat of tariffs present a particular danger as Germany has the biggest trade surplus with the U.S. in the EU. Now, Bundesbank President Joachim Nagel has warned another contraction is possible if new trade tensions become a reality. Now, for more, of course, on the markets, the key focus is Germany's future fiscal policy and this potential reform of its famous debt brake, a constitutional limit on the amount that the country can borrow. After years of strict fiscal discipline, investors are now hopeful that Berlin will start to relax that stance and begin to spend more. Now, even if a new government agrees on measures to boost the economy, analysts are not predicting a quick turnaround. In a Bloomberg survey this month, they only forecast that 0.3% growth for this year, the weakest among the euro area's four biggest economies. Of course, a reminder of how we got here. Scholz's coalition government fell apart in November after infighting between his center-left Social Democrats, the climate-focused Greens, and pro-business Free Democratic Party. Now, that triggered 3 months of campaigning dominated by the issues of irregular migration and a faltering economy. Now, I think we're just getting some of the exit polls right now. German Social Democrats getting some 16% in the election. This is the exit poll according to ARD. The Conservatives getting some 29% in the elections. Liberals, FDP, get 4.9% in the election, and Liberal FDP getting some, the far right, AfD, getting 19.5% in the election. Now, this is actually below 20%. It feels like it's significantly lower than what we had in the poll so far. So let's get straight to our Chad Thomas, who, of course, is overseeing all of this coverage. Look, we have the first exit polls. Of course, Chad, they'll be updated. I think the big surprise is AfD getting below 20% in this election.
Yeah, so they were polling right around 20%, and if this holds up, this is obviously exit polls. Through the evening, we'll be getting more detailed data, but at 19.5% means they did a little bit less than what was expected. Still makes them the second largest party in the Bundestag, and let's be honest, it's double what they did in the election 4 years ago. So they have underperformed a little bit from the polls, but they still have doubled their support. The Christian Democrats also are right around where we were sort of expecting them in the polls. And of course, for the Social Democrats, it's going to be pretty bitter evening. They're at 16%. That's their worst results since before World War II.
Yeah, so this is probably the big story so far. Scholz's Social Democrats posting their worst results since World War II, as Chad was saying, but also at the same time, AfD getting 19.5% in the election. Now, Chad will be with us over the next 2 hours as we digest the results. We'll also get to Eric Nielsen to try and figure out what the market is looking for. But we have reporters across Berlin. Bloomberg's Kriti Gupta is at SPD headquarters. Oliver Crook is at the CDU, and Stephen Carroll is at the AfD headquarters. So, Ollie, let's start with you. What's the CDU looking like right now?
Yeah, listen, this is more or less in line with expectations, a little bit lower, we have to say, for the CDU, coming in at 29%. But really the headline here is that the CDU is headed to retake the chancellery after a basically 3-year hiatus, and that the traffic light coalition led by Olaf Scholz, now under Friedrich Merz, back to the chancellery. Likely this next government will be formed under the CDU. Though I will have to say, we're here at CDU headquarters. There has not been a great deal of jubilation. There was not a huge amount of cheering when the numbers came out. It's actually a fairly, I'd say, quiet and kind of restrained sort of environment here. Again, 29% is more or less in keeping with what we had anticipated. But looking across the board here, this is not an outcome that is necessarily as decisive as the CDU would have liked to have seen. They made a lot of maneuvering towards the end of this election campaign to try to claw back some of the right-wing vote that had gone towards the AfD. It does not seem that they were sort of overwhelmingly able to do that. We're also noting here with some interest that we're getting in some of the exit polls we're seeing from the FDP below that 5% threshold. We're going to have to wait for that full number there because it's pretty close, but that would be a meaningful change because that would mean that that party is then knocked out of the Bundestag. But the headline here, Francine, is that the CDU is headed back likely to the Chancellery under the sort of new rubric of this new government. The question is, where will the sort of coalition be able to be formed? And that is what we're going to be thrashing out over the next couple of days and weeks.
Let's go to Kriti Gupta, who's at SPD headquarters in Berlin. Kriti, I mean, again, Scholz's Social Democrats have the worst results since World War II. Can Olaf Scholz stay in politics right now?
That seems to be the question. And the question is, how is he going to approach this loss? Francine, we are here at the SPD headquarters where it is standing room only on the floor. Nobody here was really expecting those numbers to cross, but 16%, as you said, for the SPD here. What's crucial is what comes next and how the SPD spins this, because look, they still want to be in some way a part of those coalition talks. But is this a point in time where Olaf Scholz comes, takes the stage, and ultimately takes the blame at a time where we do know that, of course, the CDU candidate isn't actually willing to have Olaf Scholz in a cabinet position? The question is, how do they spin it from here, and who takes leadership for the party? But Francine, just minutes ago when those poll numbers dropped out, a wave of dismay here in the SPD headquarters.
Okay, Kriti, let's also go to Stephen Carroll, who's at AfD. Stephen, I guess the question is, look, the far right are now second in command. That's pretty extraordinary, but they didn't do as well as the polls. Is it a positive, or is there disappointment at headquarters?
It was sort of muted excitement as those results were read out. There was a round of applause and a cheer. Alice Weidel, the co-leader, is actually just speaking at the event behind me at the moment. But what we did have is a positive reaction initially, but actually a greater cheer in response to that news that they would be the biggest opposition in Parliament, because that's really all the AfD was hoping for in this election as well. Remember, the other parties, because of the firewall in German politics, have said they won't go into power with them. But it's nonetheless a show of strength for a party that's grown over a relatively short period of time to be now the second largest in Parliament, to double their score from 2021. And it's worth remembering that in 2021 they'd actually lost points from the previous elections. They're reversing that trend now, and certainly in line with the influence they're now having on conversations in politics as well. We know that immigration was a huge subject in this election campaign as well, and we saw the likes of the CDU taking that on as being a central part of their platform, and that's seen as being part of the influence of what the AfD has done so far. So the question, I suppose, is what sort of opposition the AfD will be in the Bundestag, and how much they'll be able to drive issues central to them back into the broader conversation that's being had about where Germany goes next.
All right, Stephen, thanks so much. Stephen Carroll at the AfD headquarters in Berlin. Now, again, a reminder, we're just getting the exit polls. CDU, CSU at 29%. AfD seems to be standing at 19.5%. The head of the party, Alice Weidel, is just speaking at headquarters. SPD, 16%. And then we have the Greens at 13.5%. Let's get back to our guest here in the studio, Chad, who, of course, oversees all of our coverage here, and Eric Nielsen from Unicredit. Chad, I mean, now it's coalition building. And so what kind of arrangements could we see?
Yeah, and that's what we're watching, and the numbers are very close for the possibility of a grand coalition between the Christian Democrats and the Social Democrats. We won't know until later in the evening, because it really depends on whether some of these smaller parties can get into the Bundestag or not. But right now, some very initial projections coming from ARD, that's one of the main public broadcasters here, is that they would potentially be just over that threshold, those two parties, to form a coalition. But look, we have a long ways to go this evening, and we'll have to see how that plays out. But they're right on the cusp right now.
What does this mean, Eric, for the economy? Again, this is, and there's hope, I think, in the markets that a coalition could be done quite quickly. We need to see whether a two-party coalition, which would be easier to form than with more parties, would be easily achieved, and in what kind of time frame.
Right. I mean, first of all, coalitions in Germany never come quickly, right? It is even with two parties. I mean, as you alluded to it. I mean, a grand coalition again between CDU and SPD. Getting SPD to agree to become junior partner is going to take a lot of soul searching and probably the end of Scholz's political life, right? So I think they would take a good deal of time. The market, I think, meanwhile, I mean, these numbers are not far off the opinion polls. So I think that's sort of more or less priced. I think that people would probably take in the market a bit of comfort from AfD not doing quite as well, because not only do they look now from the exit polls a little bit less well than the opinion polls, but in history they'd always done better than the opinion polls.
That's right.
So maybe there's a little bit of this, and it's interesting to see for the first time in German election, virtually the entire business elite have been out appealing to people for not voting for extreme parties. So this is the business side of German life would hope for something that is stable of the old parties. Right?
Chad, I mean, again, this urgent headline that's crossing the Bloomberg terminal from your fantastic team is that the German Conservatives could form this two-party coalition with the SPD. We have no idea of time frame, and there's something very German, which is that all the heads, the leaders, then are actually debating right on the broadcaster at 8:15. Will we get a sense then of who could work together?
So that is a moment where there may be some initial playing with potential partners and talking that through. Although usually it doesn't happen until tomorrow that they really start digging into that. But this is a weeks, as Eric was saying, weeks-long process, if not months, to get a coalition.
Yeah, what do we know about, at the moment, some of the policies that could be done in place? I mean, again, they would have talked before this, right? You don't start from cold trying to build a coalition.
I mean, the thing that the markets are hoping for, of course, is that they finally open up the fiscal spigot and start spending more money. Now, the Social Democrats, if they are in the government, that actually helps potentially with that. They are in favor of potentially looking at the debt limits, the so-called debt break in Germany, and that would be something that would potentially be a help. There's a huge discussion in Germany about spending more on defense, different ways to do that. So those will be the things that they'll be looking at as they start those discussions. Can they reach agreement? One of the things that will be very difficult is around things like missiles to Ukraine. The Christian Democrats want to actually do a lot more than the Social Democrats under Olaf Scholz have been willing to do. So there'll be a lot of sticking points, but there are some things that they've obviously been in coalition together before, and so they know one another. It's a little bit different than some of these other potential possibilities that we'd be looking at.
Eric, I mean, an incredible amount of time will be written, on the debt break.
Yeah.
Again, how do the markets view this? This has been a deciding factor in this quite extraordinary
Markets want
election.
them to revise the debt break period, right? And it's not just to spend more; it is to invest more, right? And it's so I don't think there's no chance that you get away with it, or they would change it completely, but they would revise it. And I think so we know the SPD and the Greens are in favor. We know that Merz and the CDU have opened up the idea, so it's going to come. So from a market point of view, and that's why I was referring to AfD before also, it's important that AfD and others don't get a blocking minority of 1/3.
Yes,
right?
So there's some very smart people sending me messages while we're sitting here. They just said that at the moment it looks like they won't have enough for that blocking minority.
Exactly.
There'll be 5 seats short of that.
Yeah.
But again,
the numbers are still quite
the numbers
fluid,
are still fluid, and if they
Right.
get that blocking minority, then
This
that
is
makes
important.
it impossible for any reform of the debt break.
Yeah, that's because it's constitution, right? So it's a change to the constitution. So.
Final question before we have to go to break. When do the numbers settle? I mean, are we expecting just more of an update in like 30, 40 minutes?
So in the next 30, 40 minutes, we tend to get more refined numbers. Basically, they take those exit polls, they start getting partial results, and they blend them, and so they're more refined. But if there's a party like the FDP on the cusp of getting in at the 5% threshold, this could be a long night.
Yeah, it could be a long night. Always a long night. Stay with Bloomberg. So we'll be here all night. Chad Thomas, Bloomberg's executive editor for Europe and UniCredit's chief economic advisor. Eric Nielsen, of course, stay with us. This is what we found out 12 minutes ago exactly when the polls first of all closed, and we had the exit polls. CDU, CSU, you can see 29%. The AfD coming in at 19.5%. We have the SPD at 16%, and then we have the Greens at 13.5%. Now, what's extremely interesting is that the left, maybe better than expected, 8.5%, FDP 4.9%, PSW 4.7%. This is Bloomberg.
Today's CFOs focus on much more than revenues and margins. Their impact goes far beyond the balance sheet.
The world is coming at us faster than it ever has.
We're in an evolving business.
Our first job is to intimately understand and anticipate the consumer's needs.
We've been on a journey to be higher growth, more nimble, and more capital efficient.
Get passion, perspective, and more from the chief future officers of some of the world's most influential companies. New episodes this spring, only on Bloomberg.
In case you missed it, on Bloomberg Crypto.
The approach that we've been taking to crypto has been one of using regulation to stop people from trying to do interesting things they want to do. We actually have a very flexible regulatory framework. Congress saw the need to give us exemptive authority, for example. We have the ability to use these things. And instead, we've just put roadblock after roadblock up against people who are trying to come in and talk to us. And so all I'm asking is that we have an innovation policy that allows people to innovate and that allows people to try new things. And that's really applies across the board. I think there are other areas where we need to be better on innovation too, but watching what's happened to crypto over the past several years has just been extremely frustrating for someone who believes that government is there to serve the American people, not to stymie them.
Don't miss Bloomberg Crypto live Tuesdays.
Always on the heartbeat of the tech sector.
Spread across global markets.
The real-time data aspect is going to be important.
We're going to bring you expert analysis on that. Sure.
Don't miss Bloomberg's interview with the
It's the countdown to the market open as we bring you the first trades across Europe.
We'll debate the most important stories and what will drive the big investment decisions throughout the morning. I'm Guy Johnson.
I'm Kriti Gupta.
And I'm Anna Edwards. Join us every weekday morning for the opening trade, live at 7 a.m. here in London.
Only on Bloomberg. Context changes everything.
Welcome back, everyone, to our special coverage of the German election results. We're all live in Berlin. Now, this is the exit polls, the latest SDU, CSU. This is the latest, 29%. AfD coming in at 19.5%. The SPD 16%. The Greens at 13.5%. Then we have a left that have done better than expected at 8.5%. And then FDP 4.9% with BSW at 4.7%. So let's get back to Eric Nielsen, Chief Economics Advisor at UniCredit Group. And with us also Chad Thomas, Bloomberg's Executive Editor for Europe. Chad, for those who are just tuning in, so first of all, broadly, the polls were correct. But a couple of surprises. SPD worse than expected, AfD a little bit worse than expected. The left are doing quite well.
Yeah, the left party actually, they really turned it on in the final weeks of the campaign. So they were, for most of the campaign, polling below that 5% threshold that's so important for getting in the Bundestag. And then in the last couple of weeks, they had some really clever social media that seemed to really help them. They also have some candidates that really appeal in particular to younger voters. And as as you see, they're now at 8.5% in the exit polling.
Yeah, and again, so just to put it in plain English, these exit polls show that the opposition Conservatives under Merz are set to win the German vote with the defeat of the Chancellor Olaf Scholz and his Social Democrats that have had the worst polling since the Second World War. Eric, do we know why there's been a little bit of a shift? I mean, it does feel like the fabric of German society has been tested, also with the election of Donald Trump and what he's been saying on Ukraine.
Yeah, I mean, two or three things. First of all, incumbents tend to lose these days, right? So we have to keep this in mind. And Germany, as you said in your introduction, have not done particularly well in terms of economic growth. So there is a degree of that sort of in it. Then we have the overall sort of leaning or move towards the far right in all countries, where Germany has also, as you pointed out, I mean, AfD stands to double more or less their candidate. It's a big, but it's still less than in many other countries. So Germany is holding better than in that sense. And then the third thing, as you said, just within a few days, we got Donald Trump turned the plate on Ukraine and Russia. And let me put it this way. I'm glad I'm not a politician, but I'm particularly glad I'm not a politician who have been too close to Donald Trump, right? Because this is suddenly very complicated, right? So I think maybe we are seeing a little bit of the previously undecided voters swing away from AfD and Sarah Wagenknecht. So that would be my guess, but we don't know.
But it is also major, Chad, that, when you look at Die Linke, I mean, this is a surprise winner of Germany's polarization, basically, and they now have a firm seat in the Bundestag.
And the parties on the far left and the far right have done well in this election compared to when you look at the results from 4 years ago. And also the parties that were in the coalition government, they all did worse tonight than they did obviously when they won the election 4 years ago. They got punished. People were angry with all of the fighting that we all saw play out in public between the FDP, the SDP, and the Greens, and voters punished them tonight.
So can we do predictions of coalitions? It's too early, but the Conservatives could potentially do it. Looking at the numbers, like the back of the envelope numbers, could have a two-party coalition.
I think the most likely coalition based upon the numbers we see now is the Christian Democrats with the Social Democrats, if that's enough to form a coalition. If the FDP gets in, then the coalition math doesn't work potentially anymore, and then they're going to need a third partner. But if those two can team up, they have been in coalitions with one another before. The Greens didn't do as well, and also during the campaign, the Christian Democrats and the Greens were sparring with one another. Friedrich Merz just yesterday was taking the Greens to task. So it seems harder to see that coalition forming. Of course, politics is the art of the possible, as we all know, but still, that one looks more difficult, and they've never been in a coalition with one another at the federal level before.
That's an optimistic guide to politics. I would say it's more of the art of the impossible. Let's go straight to Petra Sorge, who's joining us also on the phone from Green Party headquarters. Petra, we're just talking about coalition building. What's the mood, first of all, at Green headquarters, and what kind of role could they play?
Yeah, hello. So the Greens currently are at 13.5% in the first reviews. That would be about 1% less than they had in the last elections in 2021. But I think what is interesting, it will hinge pretty much on the small parties, what role the Greens will have in the future. So if the Liberals, the FDP, will stay out of parliament, what is currently looking like, because they wouldn't make it above the 5% threshold, then the Greens will pretty much remain or have to go into the opposition, because the Conservatives could form a majority with SPD. But of course, if the small parties make it in parliament, then masks are much more difficult looking right now. So then the two main parties will need support of another party, and that could come to the Greens again, because that could match with the goal of expanding the financial scope for future tasks, like from military to investment to the transformation of the society, because the Greens are in favor of abolishing the debt brake, which of course is a key issue in the future for the country.
Yeah, and Chad, I guess to Petra's point, I mean, the Greens received a lot of criticism, right, during the campaign, that it was their fault if the economy wasn't doing great. But if you look at the numbers, they pretty much held up.
Yeah, they did okay compared to the Social Democrats and the FDP. Of course, they're the ones who really lost in the results as we look at it, because now they're at the cusp of getting in, and maybe they don't. If they do get in, there's the potential that then you could have the Social Democrats and the FDP and the Christian Democrats in a coalition with one another. But the idea of the FDP and the Social Democrats getting back together after this coalition that they were just in...
Difficult to see, huh?
Certainly not with the personalities currently at the head of those parties.
I mean, what does the economy need right now, Eric?
They need investment, right? They need private investment and public investment. And the public investment require the debt brake to be changed, or you do what you did with the defense before. You make these funny extra budgetary funds, and you sort of make sure. And this is my, and I think many people in the market's biggest concern about FDP, which usually stands for sort of good free market policies that the market likes. But because they were so determined that the debt brake could not move, they then ended up agreeing to extra budgetary funds to do the defense that the population wants. And that is not good fiscal policy because it's not transparent anymore. So this is, they need, and then of course the market needs, or the economy needs private investment, and for that you need a banking union and a capital markets union, which I think there's a fairly good chance that what looks like could be the next government would sign on to.
Let's also go to CDU headquarters, where Olli Kruk is standing by. Oliver, so we know that Friedrich Merz is probably set to win the German vote. What do we know about his policies that economists and markets will like?
Yeah, listen, overall, this is a sort of policy mix from the CDU. If they're able, they're obviously going to lead this next government. If they're able to get in sort of a coalition where they can get the majority of that fiscal policy through, that will be something that will be seen as favorable by the markets and favorable, indeed, by economists. This is the things we're talking about are sort of tax cuts at the corporate and personal income level. They're trying to encourage a lot more people to join the labor force. We know that the demographic problem in Germany has been one of the many things that's been weighing on the economy over the last years. They're going to create all kinds of incentives to get people not to retire at a certain age, to sort of have maybe tax-exempt income on the other end of that in order to make sure that they continue working for longer, trying to expand that labor force. And again, also talking about potentially more in terms of foreign policy, more support for Ukraine. You'll remember that Friedrich Merz was one of the people that was very outspoken in his criticism of Olaf Scholz for not sending, for example, those long-range Taurus missiles into Ukraine. The big question, of course, is going to be around the debt brake. I think that there is general consensus increasingly around the idea that in order to hit defense spending that is sort of appropriate for 2025, and in 2025 where the United States security guarantees are less and less certain, and they are going to have to do at least some kind of workaround around the debt brake to get that defense spending up. And I think that potentially, I mean, most of the parties that they would pair up in coalition with would be sort of in favor of that. But again, this is also a party that wants to cut bureaucracy, that wants to sort of reduce the barrier for starting businesses and try to get the economy moving. I think that there is, however, in many of the people that we speak to, many of the businesses we speak to, many of the associations we speak to, that while the CDU sort of policy at the margin is positive for the economy, would sort of boost things, that they're not potentially grasping the severity of the difficulties structurally that exist for the German economy, and that the conversation around the debt brake, not just around defense, but potentially more widely, is something that they're going to have to look at. Whether or not they're willing to do that, you know, they have been sort of very skeptical about that. Friedrich Merz himself has been sort of going back and forth a bit. That is going to be one of the central questions, I think, for markets going into these coalition negotiations.
Yeah, my central question is also, how do they do, Chad, with AfD in opposition? Does it change the policies of Friedrich Merz?
Yeah, and just before we go to that, we do have some more numbers coming in now from AfD, and this would actually has some partial results in it, so that the numbers are being refined. No real big movement that we're seeing here, and the one that we're really watching this evening is the Liberal Party, the FDP. They're still at the 4.9%, so at the moment they're not in. But those numbers just coming through now, so it is starting to be a little bit more refined, a little bit more cemented.
But those first exit polls seem to be pretty much on the money. ARD projecting, for example, the CDU-CSU to get to 29% in the German election. We'll have plenty more throughout the evening. This is Bloomberg.
DraftKings hit a milestone in the second quarter of 2024. For the first time as a public company, it turned a profit.
Is this a new era for DraftKings?
There's an inflection from when you're cash flow negative and you're operating off of equity raises from the past to when you're self-funded and you're cash flow positive and able to control your destiny a lot more.
You've had your first quarters of profitability now. Does that take pressure off? Does it increase pressure?
I think it increases pressure. I mean, once you start making profits, people expect you to make more, and all of a sudden you're valued on a multiple of those profits as opposed to the theoretical what could be. So very important, I think.
When you're cash flow negative, you've sold a vision of what the company should be working on, and you're very focused on working on that and delivering against that. When you've pivoted to profitability, the world of what you can work on is a little bit open, and there's a lot of different ideas, and it requires more focus than ever to make sure that you are prioritizing on the most important things that are going to deliver the most value.
DraftKings' solid standing in a booming sector gives them the luxury to play the long game. They're not under pressure to cut costs.
When you have really strong revenue growth, you don't need that. If you look at where we are today and where we want to be and where we believe we will be, the vast majority of the incremental EBITDA is not coming from any cost reduction. It's coming from increased revenue.
We don't feel like we need to cut costs because we're growing our revenue so much. We want to grow our revenue into our existing cost structure, and there's no need to reduce the cost as long as we're being efficient with what we allow our cost growth to look like.
Bringing you up-to-the-minute financial news whenever and wherever it happens. I'm Michael McKee at the Federal Reserve, and this is Bloomberg.
Key investors, top executives, global innovators. Join me for in-depth conversations with the biggest newsmakers on the day's top stories. Insight with Haslinda Onen, only on Bloomberg.
In case you missed it on Balance of Power.
Does Trump coin, show, by the way. Melania coin help to delegitimize serious crypto coins?
Look, meme coins, they have another handle for them, another four-letter word.
I can't say it on the air.
All these meme coins really undermine what is digital properties that can make a huge difference over the long term. But people buy it.
Yeah.
People are interested in it. And I wasn't into Beanie Babies, but perhaps this is digital Beanie Babies.
Don't miss Balance of Power live every weekday.
Back to our special coverage of the German election results live from Berlin. Now, this is just coming in. So far, we have the latest IRD projections. Merz's CDU-CSU set to win some 29% in the German election. Now, what we have is AfD, 19.5%, the SPD at about 16%. So let's go straight to headquarters. We have team coverage all across Berlin. Bloomberg's Kriti Gupta is at the SPD headquarters in Berlin. Oliver Crook is at CDU headquarters. Let's start with Kriti. Kriti, what can you tell us about one of the biggest defeats, actually the biggest defeat for the SPD since the Second World War?
I mean, this is an enormous moment for the SPD, a giant wake-up call if it wasn't already. This idea that the economic kind of toll that Olaf Scholz's cabinet has taken on these numbers, showing up at 16%, to your point, the worst number, the worst showing since before World War II. That being said, the question now is where the leadership of the SPD lies now that we are seeing that the most likely outcome at the moment is this coalition with the CDU. The question is also where Olaf Scholz falls in that leadership question and whether or not he's the right person to be leading the SPD at the moment. We're likely to hear from him in just a few minutes, awaiting those comments in terms of how he shapes the path forward for this party. At the same time, we got comments from Matthias Merz, the acting Secretary General for the SPD, saying that Boris Pistorius, who is the current acting defense minister, is likely going to have a role. Francine, this is crucial because, of course, we do know that as these snap elections were happening, we started to see a question within the SPD party of whether Olaf Scholz should be putting himself up or whether we had a better shot with Boris Pistorius. That was the question for the SPD. So to hear this from the acting Secretary General is quite the statement. We'll see how Olaf Scholz now phrases not only the defeat, but the path forward for the SPD.
Okay, Kriti, thanks so much. Kriti Gupta there at SPD headquarters in Berlin. Now, just a reminder, we're starting to get the projection. So what happened about 32 minutes ago is that we had the exit polls, and now we have the projection, which means that they're more accurate as the voting gets underway. So these are the latest projections. CDU 29, AfD coming in at 19.6. We have the SPD at 16 and the Greens at 13.3. The SPD, Chad, have done spectacularly badly, actually, given that they've been in power. How does they regroup and redress today?
So Olaf Scholz said last week already in one of the debates that if he were to lose the election, he would not personally be in any government with Friedrich Merz and the Christian Democrats. So you would assume that he's going to step away from an active role in politics. He hasn't said anything yet, but that's what we'll all be watching for this evening. Kriti mentioned Boris Pistorius. He is the most popular politician in Germany, period. So expect him starting tomorrow, a week from now. He's going to be the one who's the face of the party out there talking on behalf of the SPD. It'll be interesting to see if they do end up in a coalition, the SPD and the Christian Democrats, what role does Boris Pistorius claim for himself in that government? Does he want the finance ministry? Does he want the foreign ministry? He's currently the defense minister.
Yeah, and he actually gave a pretty, important and emblazoned, inflamed speech after we heard from J.D. Vance just last week at the Munich Security Conference.
Yeah, he stood up, right? I mean, they were widely reported. People heard him say this is enough or something, and he walked off to revise his speech, as I heard actually also Steinmeier did to reply back. I mean, it was an extraordinarily aggressive speech by the American vice president, and these two German politicians stood up. I mean, but it was not widely reported, really, at the end of the day. But it would be interesting. I mean, it's that would be. I mean, it's presumably him or Lars Klingbeil, right? The other leading German, and one would have thought that either of them would have liked to start their leadership, if that's what it comes to, in a position to create a profile. But as the polls show now, they have to get into this coalition, right?
That's going to be the difficult thing for them, because in theory, when you lose election, you lose it that badly, you do go into the opposition to regroup. But they may be forced into a coalition because the parties in the center have to come together.
We're also looking at live pictures, and there's quite a lot of live pictures. This is the beauty of election night here in Germany. So we're just hearing from Friedrich Merz, who's, of course, addressing his party with a pretty decisive win. I mean, it's pretty much in line with what the polls were saying. Again, through our polling, he consistently polled quite poorly with women and younger voters. There seems to have been little enthusiasm for him. This is what our T-Live blog is also writing. I urge everyone to watch TV, but also follow our live blog. But actually, his party is successful today. So let's go to Oliver Crook, who joins us from CDU headquarters in Berlin. Ollie, you're just outside that room where we're hearing from Friedrich Merz. A very animated crowd. I'm sure they're extremely happy of the win they've had this evening.
Yeah, so listen, Francine, I mean, I think that, so we're hearing from Friedrich Merz right now. I don't know if you can hear him in the background. So again, they're claiming this as a sort of decisive victory. I think there is a little bit in the atmosphere, a light air of disappointment, because they still fell among some of these polls we're seeing below that 30% threshold, though they were sort of seen to be the winners for a very long time, really since the beginning of this election process began back in November, and they've sort of gratified that expectation. Now the question is going to be, who are they going to enter into coalition with? How much sort of momentum are they going to have going into that? And again, I think that we're hearing from Merz now saying that basically they've decisively won this election. But again, I think there's a lot of bad news for almost every party in this sort of election results, right? We just heard about the SPD. I mean, the CDU could have come in a little bit strong. If you look at the sort of historic averages of what we saw during the Merkel years and her many terms as chancellor, she did well above 30% for many of them. She even did sort of over 40% on some of them. So this is going to be actually the slowest level CDU mandate that you've got really since the turn of the century, though decisively much higher than we got from the SPD that forced them to form that very clumsy traffic light coalition that eventually just ended in failure at the end of last year. Scholz had about 25%. So now at least the CDU is coming with a slightly stronger hand, though perhaps not quite as strong as they would have liked to have had.
Yeah, so we're just listening to the speech, of course, of Friedrich Merz trying to get any policies that he's saying there. What's very interesting is also we understand turnout overall for this election was at 84%. That's the highest since Germany reunification in 1990. Ollie, what are you looking out for in his speech?
Yeah, so listen, anything that we can hear about what the sort of policy direction is going to be, any hints that we're going to get into sort of coalition building, what it looks like from these sort of early times right now is that they're going to be able to build a coalition, that grand coalition that will likely, potentially, that would include the SPD, probably not include Olaf Scholz, so sort of a clean slate there, because this was a very sort of acrimonious, as far as German election campaigns go, a lot of sort of bad blood that was built between Olaf Scholz and Friedrich Merz in the lead up to this election. I mean, we spoke to some senior lawmakers over at the CDU who said that despite the fact that they have more sort of policy in common with the SPD, that actually on an interpersonal level they get along better with the Green Party. So these are sort of some of the conversations that are going on besides the behind the scenes. But again, what we would like to see from Friedrich Merz is what is going to be the turnaround plan for this economy that has been languishing for, contracting for 2 years, but really for longer than that. And particularly his stance versus Donald Trump. I don't know if that's going to get any airtime in this speech tonight, but this is going to be one of the central questions for all European leaders coming in. And of course, Francine, the other question, the leadership void within Europe. Is this a sort of mandate from Friedrich Merz that means that somebody, a strong German leader, could step up at that EU level to try to take on some of the difficult challenges that are facing the continent as a whole?
Oliver, we just heard there from, of course, Friedrich Merz saying he wants to form a German government as soon as possible. He, for me, seems to be stating the obvious, saying that they need a government with a good parliamentary majority. Chad, what does that look like?
Well, that's interesting. What does he think a good parliamentary majority is? Right now, if he were to form a two-party coalition with the Social Democrats, they would barely have a majority, and that's if the Free Democrats, FDP, don't make it in. So does that mean he's potentially going to bring in another partner? You would think he doesn't want to do that if he doesn't have to. It gets more complicated the more parties you have in the government. So what is his version of a comfortable parliamentary majority? The fact that he says he wants to form a government quickly, I think if you talk to politicians in Germany, they realize the world is moving fast. We have almost every day something from the White House, and so they know they can't wait weeks and months to form a government. But on the other hand, that is generally how long this process plays out in Germany. So can he get someone to go into a coalition with him quickly and to agree on the program that they're going to move forward with?
Eric, Friedrich Merz saying that he wants to form a government as soon as possible, but he also says the world will not wait for us, and lengthy coalition discussions, which seems to be right on the money. I mean, he's always ruled out, cooperating with the far-right AfD in any form, but I think it hasn't stopped, Alice Weidel, the Chancellor candidate for the AfD, offering to join coalition talks.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's these numbers, if they hold through the night or into the final results, I think it's difficult to imagine anything else than another grand coalition, right? The SPD has then to figure out who's going to be the leader, and then they know. I mean, Merz would surely have loved to have a choice between the SPD and the Greens, right? I mean, but it doesn't look that way. I don't know the math when we know who don't make it in, but it's like, but SPD can demand a big price, right? Because his only real alternative is this idea of a minority government where he sort of zigzags, but that's not stable. So he doesn't want that, I'm sure.
Yeah, the SPD knows that Friedrich Merz needs them, and that's a good position for them to be in, even though they had a very bad result tonight. Yeah. If they know that they're needed for the coalition, it means they can demand a lot in the negotiations.
So we're expecting, and we think that maybe the SPD are waiting for the CDU to wrap up, so that we're expecting Olaf Scholz to come on stage very shortly. We also understand from our reporter on the ground, Kriti Gupta, that Boris Pistorius is also walking out on stage. What do you think we'll hear from him?
It's interesting if they're both on stage together. Will there be some sort of a handover between the two of them? I think it's probably too early for that to happen tonight. It's potentially something more for tomorrow, but it could be that you were seeing the exiting chancellor on the one hand and the new face of the party at the same time. What
do you think, Eric, should be the main message from Olaf Scholz tonight?
If these numbers hold, he needs to step aside, right? I mean, he cannot avoid taking some responsibility. When the opinion polls beforehand were there.
These are live pictures where we're just seeing, of course, Olaf Scholz having walked on stage.
He was the least popular, right, to be chancellor, right? So anyway, sorry.
No, he's just starting. I think he's speaking in German, so it'll be very interesting to see how he starts off. If he just starts by saying, "Look, it's all my fault. I need to step down," or what?
Unlikely.
Yeah. By the way, at the end, Pistorius wasn't on stage with him. If you look at the people on the stage, he was not there with him.
Für mich ist auch ganz wichtig zu sagen, das ist ein Ergebnis, aus dem wir gemeinsam.
I don't know how many viewers speak German, so maybe we can, my German is quite poor. I know, we're trying to listen and at the same time talk at the same time. What would Pistorius bring to the table? Again, would he be a good part? In terms of personalities, we sometimes underestimate the fact that actually leaders that work in a coalition kind of have to like each other. I mean, this is about policy, but it's also trying to find workarounds.
Well, what I think the average voter likes with Pistorius is he's just very clear. He's easy to understand and very direct.
Well.
He communicates well. Yeah. And that was one of the problems that Olaf Scholz has had as Chancellor. He really has struggled to get his message across to voters.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that completely. I mean, they need somebody who can explain policy. The beauty, maybe, if I may go back to the coalition negotiation, the beauty is that the world is changing in front of our eyes. So they're not necessarily bound to the normal extent by the pledges in the campaign. The world is changing. We have to live up to it, right? So that gives a little bit of flexibility.
But yeah, the fact that the world is changing, and it puts Germany in a very precarious position. They have a lot to deal with. It's Ukraine, it's Donald Trump, it's investment, it's an economy that frankly has been doing quite so badly, and that consumption is also not coming through in economic figures.
This is either going to go two ways when we think about the coalition negotiations. They turn very inward, and they're focused solely on what they each as a party can get out of those negotiations, or they say, this is a moment, and the world is looking to us, and we have to move quickly. Obviously, what the world is hoping is that they move quickly, but it comes down to the personalities who will be sitting at the table if they're able to actually do that, to get that agreement as quickly as they can.
We have live pictures, of course, from the SPD headquarters, where Olaf Scholz has also just said, I have responsibility for this result. Let's get straight to Kriti Gupta, who's at SPD headquarters here in Berlin. Kriti, the main focus was also on Boris Pistorius, whether he would have a defining role in being head of SPD. He's not on stage, but you saw him walk out.
Absolutely. I mean, this is something that was a speech that was very much expected from the kind of SPD and from Olaf Scholz. Remember, the question here is leadership for the SPD, what moves forward. And as you said, you already have Olaf Scholz making those comments where he's basically taking full responsibility for this. And this is really where his economic kind of track record really, really matters in terms of not only really spurring back the kind of toll that the COVID-19 pandemic took on Germany's economy, but also removing the debt brake, something that really created these drops in talks as well, not to mention some of the defense spending as well. And that's where it's crucial that in the front row right now, waiting with Olaf Scholz, is indeed Boris Pistorius, of course, the favorite, as our colleague Chad Thomas had mentioned, for the SPD right now. He's someone who's been actively pushing for more investment and been really tasked with modernizing the German army. And that's really where it's crucial to see where Olaf Scholz takes this conversation next. Of course, we are waiting for him to complete his speech. He's speaking behind me right now with a horde of supporters, but ultimately, at the very end of the day, as expected, taking full responsibility for the biggest loss since World War II for the SPD, Fran.
Kriti, thanks so much. Kriti Gupta there at SPD headquarters in Berlin. Again, the evening is young. The results are only just being counted. So just remember that. Again, it does feel like the numbers that are coming in, either the exit polls or the first projections, are pretty much in line with the polls that we've had so far. So I think that gives comfort to the panel here with me that the results are not going to be far off. But again, the results are just only being counted. And so we look at the projections. Let's also talk about foreign policy. We're now joined by Daniela Schwarzer, a board member at the Bertelsmann Foundation, author of a book called Time of Crisis, Germany Under Pressure. Daniela, thank you so much for joining us. What do the results of the election mean for how emboldened or how strong Germany could be in foreign policy?
Well, first of all, the results are very much in line with the expectations. So at least there's no real bad surprise tonight. However, at this point, we don't know how quickly a government will be formed. The point is that the Liberals are now estimated at around 5%. And if they just go a little under, that will mean it will be easier to shape a government. If they make it into parliament, if they jump over the 5% threshold, it will be far more difficult, because in that case, three parties will be needed. And the CSU, the Christian Democrats from Bavaria, have basically excluded a coalition with the Greens. So there's a strong push for a conservative, social democrat liberal government in case the liberals come in. Why is that important for foreign policy? First of all, because the longer it takes to shape a government, and 3 parties is more difficult than 2, the more uncertainty will there be for Germany's role on European affairs, and in particular on security and defense matters. As we observe every day, geopolitical developments occupy minds everywhere in Europe, and Germany is a key player. So a long government formation can be very difficult for European partners to work with, as we need to take clear positions on security and defense. But Friedrich Merz, the leader of the Christian Democrats, he has been pretty clear, and he has held a very, let's say, ambitious foreign policy speech where he said he stands for support for Ukraine, a continuation of sanctions on Russia. He said that he would travel to France and Poland on his first day in office to really show how much Germany needs to work with its closest partners within the European Union. And he has said that it is important to move ahead with defense cooperation. So as soon as he gets into office, I think there will be more of a push from the German side, but the question is, when will that happen?
Yeah. Daniela, I mean, we definitely saw Friedrich Merz being criticized during the campaign for trying to push through some hardline immigration measures with the help of the far-right AfD. But do you see any cooperation between the 2 parties going forward?
As the results tonight look, I don't think that will happen. And also, he said very clearly throughout the campaign that he will not work with the far right in government. It looks like he will not need to form a minority government, so he doesn't need to count on their support. And he definitely does not want to build a coalition with the far right. So I think the results make it possible for him to stick to that very clear line which he held throughout the campaign. There was the moment where he decided to push for very short-term activist migration measures. He got support of AfD. At that moment, he said, I don't care who supports me in that. It's very interesting to see that this push for tougher migration measures, which basically failed, didn't give him extra points in the opinion polls. So people broadly understood that this was a movement in the campaign and not really on substance. And I think the CDU will definitely push for a different migration policy, but can do so in a much calmer way, in a much more planned way, and in a much more cooperative way with the democratic parties of Germany. And he will not, very probably not need AfD for any measures on that.
Daniela, I also want to get the thoughts of Eric and Chad, because Eric was shaking his head when you say, Eric kind of thinks that a 2-way coalition is possible. And again, the difference between 3 and 2 is massive in terms of timeline, in terms of policies, and just in terms of sticking together. Yeah.
I mean, from a market point of view, you would have to hope that it's a 2-party. I mean,
is that possible, you think?
Yeah, well, I mean, you've done the math, because it depends on who gets in or not, and how these votes get or the seats get reallocated. You also remember, I mean, it is actually 3, right? The CDU is a union of CDU and CSU, so getting 3 parties in with them, it's almost 4 now. It's like, so it's not so easy. The other thing is, importantly, I think, for sort of the next couple of years and then into the next election one day, is that if you have 3 parties, including SPD and the Greens, then you have really 2 opposition parties, the far right and Die Linke on the pretty far left, right? That doesn't, for people who believe in sort of central policies and pro-Europe, that's not such a great picture, let me put it that way.
We just had a headline from Olaf Scholz. He's still up on stage speaking. He said that while he will remain as a caretaker chancellor, which is what we would expect, this is what happens when someone loses. It takes a while, as we've been discussing, to form a government, so he'll remain as chancellor for now. But that the negotiations of a new government is something that he will not participate in. So that basically says he's removing himself from the process, which in theory speeds up everything, because it makes it easier for the Social Democrats under Boris Pistorius or others to start those negotiations if that's what they choose to do.
Daniela, what do you think the SPD looks like under Boris Pistorius if he's indeed the chosen one?
Well, I think we have to be very clear here. Olaf Scholz has been voted out as Chancellor, but he can't just hand over to Boris Pistorius because the party has an elected party leadership, and those are two different people. So the party will have to see for itself, do they also want to change the party leadership or not? And only in that case would Boris Pistorius, if he became party chairman, which I see no indication at the moment for, then he would lead the coalition negotiations. Right now, there are two people in place, and they are the ones responsible for this. Lars Klingbeil being the one who is now just on the screen. He is very likely, unless he now tells us that he steps down too, he would be the person to actually organize the team with his co-chair for the negotiations. Boris Pistorius, as defense minister, has done a very good job, and he also is the person that Germans most like. So he will definitely play a strong political role. He may move into a prominent government position, but at this moment, it's not about Scholz handing over to him, because the person we're just seeing on the screen is one of the two party chairpersons.
Yeah, and we're just, as you correctly said, Daniela, we're just hearing from Lars Klingbeil there, who's, of course, a party leader. But I guess it just depends on the timing, right, of all of this. I mean, a lot of things can happen, but what happens more immediately in the next couple of weeks?
I think when we talk about Boris Pistorius, it's not likely that he, as Daniela says, is going to be the one officially heading the party. But he is the face of the Social Democrats in terms of whom do people most like. And so I think he's likely to play an important role in these discussions. He may not be the one who's sitting there at the table doing the negotiations. That will likely be, as Daniela was saying, Lars Klingbeil, who's up on stage with Olaf Scholz now, and there's another leader in the party as well. Those two will probably be the ones doing those negotiations unless they were to step down, although we're hearing they don't intend to do that. But Boris Pistorius, I think I don't see a situation where he's not a key part of the Social Democrats moving forward.
Because he's so popular.
Because he's so popular.
Yeah. From a market's point of view, I don't think it matters a whole lot. Both these two, Pistorius and Klingbeil, are seen as center-right, pragmatic political leaders. I mean, so I don't think from my point of view, one hopes that negotiations go quickly and that you get something that's stable, and it is sort of a pro-Europe, most importantly, and pro-reform of the economy that's needed, right?
So, Daniela, just to wrap it up, it's very clear that we're in unprecedented times with a lot going on. What do you think the new government, once it's formed, whether it be a 2- or 3-way, needs to focus on first? Is it domestic economy, or does it have to be foreign policy, including Ukraine?
Well, it's really no choice. It has to be defense. It has to be Ukraine. It is the relationship with the United States and Russia, because things are moving very quickly between Donald Trump and potentially Vladimir Putin. If they sit down for negotiations and if they find some kind of deal they want to propose to the Ukrainian President Zelensky, then Europeans will have a role to play, and they want to play a role. The problem now is that they are not part of the first conversations that are being held between the US and Russia, but Germany will have to play a key role. Germany is the single largest supporter of Ukraine after the United States, so it will be essential how the new government positions itself. And then for those things that are not imposed by geopolitical developments, but which are essentially a choice of the new government, I would expect a CDU-led government to focus firstly on the economic situation, on some reform of, as Friedrich Merz has said several times, to de-bureaucratize not only the German state apparatus, but also to push for less bureaucracy from the EU. But, that may sound a little EU critical, but the matter of fact is really that Germany, like almost no other country in the European Union, needs the single market as it becomes more and more difficult to export to the US and to export to China. So I think he will have to find a way of suggesting reforms for policy measures already decided upon in Brussels without sounding too EU critical, because Germany will need to take a strong leadership role in the European Union.
Daniela, thank you so much. Daniela Schwarzer, they're a board member at the Bertelsmann Foundation. We'll have plenty more, of course, as our special on the Germany election continues. Friedrich Merz projected to win the German federal election.
Listen carefully. Can you hear the rhythm in the markets? Not just in the syncopations triggered by inflation, but in the preludes leading to global elections, in the dissonance that moves the Nikkei, and the rising course conducted by AI. There's music in the markets, and if you want to learn to listen for it, we'll show you how.
I've seen firsthand how some fashion businesses make women feel. And I think there's one thing, you know, being really vocal and being an Instagram activist and talking about something. There's a difference than putting your money where your mouth is and really trying to do something about the problem. And that's what I did with that business. It was about how do I take everything that I know and I've learned and actually do the opposite. And I think that as a young black female entrepreneur, the only thing that I could do was what I know from my experience. And the honest truth is I didn't set out to create a company that was like deeply rooted in the principles of inclusivity and diversity. I set out to make a company that was right for me and my friends, and I knew that if I had a problem, chances are somebody else does. And I think that's where so many businesses are, you know, created, when you're solving a problem that's real for you and therefore real for the consumer.
Good morning. This is Bloomberg Surveillance.
Welcome back to the opening trade.
This is Bloomberg Technology.
This is the Asia Trade.
This is Wall Street Week. Welcome to Balance of Power.
This is Bloomberg Television.
Asia is at the forefront of some of the world's biggest stories. I'm Shevrian in Tokyo.
And I'm Heidi Stroud-Watts here in Sydney, where the trading day begins. We're here in the center of all the action to get you set up with the numbers, news, and knowledge you need for the day ahead.
The demand is indeed recovering.
We've been waiting for this moment.
The opportunity of a century.
Join us on Bloomberg The Asia Trade. Weekdays only on Bloomberg TV. Context changes everything.
To our special coverage of the German election results live from Berlin. Now, this is what we know so far. It's been an hour since the polls start. Well, first of all, the voting polls actually closed. Now we're counting. The night is young, so things can change. But this is what we know so far. Now, the exit polls and early vote projections show that the opposition conservatives under Friedrich Merz are set to win the German vote with a defeat for Chancellor Olaf Scholz and his social Democrats. We have CDU at 29%, CDU-CSU 29%. We have the SPD at 16%. Now, we heard from Friedrich Merz saying he wants to form a new government as soon as possible, noting the world will not wait for us to have lengthy coalition talks. Then we get onto the AfD. You can see AfD at 19.6%. This is the latest projection. The far-right Alternative for Germany is tracking second and looks on course to become the main opposition force in the parliament. And then the big surprise, is Die Linke. The Greens at 13.3%, but Die Linke doing a lot better than the polls had suggested. Let's get straight to our reporters on the ground here in Berlin. Bloomberg's Kriti Gupta is at SPD headquarters. Oliver Crook is at CDU headquarters. So let's go to Oliver Crook, who I think is also standing by with a guest. Ollie.
That's right, Francine. Thank you so much. We're very pleased to be joined by Mario Vogt, who is one of the CDU lawmakers at the Bundestag from Thüringen. I'd like to begin, if we might, just with your reaction this night. Almost a 30% vote, about 29%. What is your reaction to the result this evening?
Yeah, it's a good night for Germany because Germans have voted for change in the government. 3 years of the former coalition is over, and now we can drive for economical growth again and also for much more stable Germany.
And in that sort of thinking about your priorities coming into this administration under Friedrich Merz, first of all, how quickly do you think you can form a government? How quickly can you get a coalition together?
Yeah, we are in for a long night because there are pretty close results, specifically with the smaller parties, and so we probably have to wait and see what's going to happen. But the policy priorities are pretty clear. We want to have an economic growth agenda for Germany, which we enable small and medium enterprises to thrive. We're also going to have a tax cut reform placed, and also we will look into the migration policy. A lot of Germans are concerned about illegal immigration, and this is what we want to solve.
And in terms of getting that policy agenda through, who do you think would be a best coalition partner for you there? Do you think that it's best to do just one other partner? Would you enter in with the SPD? Is that your base case at this point?
I think, like in all governments all around the globe, it's much easier to just have like one additional partner than two, but we have to take what the voters have decided on, and I think the crucial question is the CDU-CSU has such a comforting lead that we also can set our policy agenda through, and this is what we are aiming for. But overall, I think the campaign is now over, and we have to look for a policy-driven, rational approach, and this is what we will do starting from tomorrow onwards.
But a lot of people have different ideas of what rational is. I think for one topic for you is the debt brake, right? This is something that we've spoken to for a very, very long time in Germany. We talk about the sort of economic crisis that's going on here. I speak to many CEOs and sort of lobbies of different organizations, and they say that even the CDU, who does have a much more pro-business attitude, doesn't grasp the sort of severity of what's going on with the economy, and that maybe things a little bit outside of the box are needed, potentially more stimulative action, potentially looking at the debt brake. Is that something that you are engaged in talking about and looking at reforming or working around?
I don't know. I think it is too early to discuss it. I mean, I'm Prime Minister of one of the German states, and so from that point of view, I'm always interested that we are physically conservative, that we look into a sound fiscal policy, but we also need infrastructure investments. So from that point of view, I think a stimulus package coming from a tax cut policy program and also looking into investment programs, this might be a good combination, but it's too early to tell.
And just a quick final two questions. Just also the state that you refer to as Thüringen. This is a place where the AfD has won last time. What is your sort of appraisal of what the AfD's role is going to be in politics? It has been obviously a very large part of at least shifting the debate within Germany in this election campaign.
They are narrowing the focus when it comes to migration policy, but they also tap into a voter electorate where they basically say, well, we are fed up with how the German federal government is run, and this kind of protest vote is really in the East much more crucial because a lot of people don't have so much deep pockets, and they feel it when the economy is not growing, and this is what we're seeing. That's why I think that with a Friedrich Merz government, we will have a better voice of Eastern Germans in the federal government, and this will bring back disconcerted voters again.
And one final question for you. There's another sort of protagonist on the global stage right now is Donald Trump, the CDU. How are you going to handle the relationship with Donald Trump? It's becoming harder and harder to ignore his policy sort of towards Europe. Everyone's been trying to be very hopeful about it. Doesn't seem that hopeful.
As someone who believes in a transatlantic partnership, I believe we will find common ground, but this means that Germans have also to engage European countries in a strong alliance under the umbrella of the European Union. And if we are able to do that, I think we are in a pretty good position to also negotiate with the deal maker on the other side of the Atlantic.
Well, Mario Vogt, thank you so much for your time this evening and the sort of celebrations this evening here at the CDU headquarters. Speaking there with one of the CDU lawmakers about their ambitions as they are sort of looking to take over the Chancellery in the tough coalition negotiations ahead.
Oliver there, Crook, at the headquarters of the CDU in Berlin. Interesting to hear Mario Voigt actually saying that the night will be long. I don't think he's suggesting that there will be a coalition forming over the night, but they really want to number crunch to be sure whether they can be a two-party coalition or whether it has to be a three-party one. Bloomberg's Kriti Gupta is at SPD headquarters in Berlin. Kriti, we heard from Chancellor Scholz calling the result bitter. He also spoke to reporters, or actually to supporters, saying it's a bad result, and that's also his responsibility.
Absolutely, Fran. As you said, Olaf Scholz taking full responsibility, and some of his party leaders saying you fought like a lion, you did the best you could. Those comments garnering plenty of applause right here in the SPD. But at the end of the day, Lars Klingbeil, one of the party leaders, and of course Saskia Esken, the other party leader, both taking the stage after Olaf Scholz's comments, saying that personnel changes are coming anew. Lars even going as far to say that you can take responsibility by being both in government and in opposition. Early signs that perhaps that is some sort of veiled warning to Friedrich Merz as he, of course, takes on potentially the chancellorship. And that is important, of course, as we talk about the future of the SPD looks like. Fran, we've been here. We're starting to see the members of the SPD party slowly start to file out, but some of the members still remain. We'll see if we can get some more comments from them. But at the end of the day, the leadership here for the SPD is what's truly in question.
Kriti, thanks so much. Kriti Gupta there at SPD headquarters in Berlin. Now, Eric Nielsen, Chief Economics Advisor at UniCredit Group, is still with us, and we're also joined by Rachel Tassenfreund, a Senior Research Fellow on Transatlantic Relations at the German Council on Foreign Relations. So, Eric, thank you so much for sticking around. Rachel, welcome to the program. We're trying to figure out really whether it's a two- or three-party coalition. Yeah. How much does that change on how this country, which is really in the firing line of the U.S., will deal with Donald Trump?
Well, first of all, there's a leadership change, and that's really important. Friedrich Merz is going to be better positioned to approach Donald Trump because Scholz made a big show of being sort of best friends with Biden, and I'm sure Trump noticed that. So that's, first of all, a good sign. But we saw during the last coalition, which was Germany's first three-party coalition, how difficult that is. A three-party coalition is just difficult to manage, and, maybe this one would be better, but it leads to a lot of infighting, which makes you look weak as a leader. And so a two-party coalition would be simpler for Merz if it was just Merz and the SPD. They have the numbers for it, and it's not even that narrow. I mean, they'd have, according to the current numbers, they'd have 11 seats more than they need. So you could have a couple off votes, and that would work. That's probably what the best result is for the CDU-CSU right now.
How do you think Friedrich Merz will actually deal with Donald Trump? Will there be a personal connection? We know that actually they're both very strong personalities.
Yeah. I think he's going to try that. Yeah, I mean they're businessmen. They're both conservative, so I think Merz will try to make a personal connection. It's also politically less difficult for him than it is for the left of center parties whose voters really don't like Donald Trump. I mean, also the CDU voters don't love Donald Trump, but he can get away with a bit more of a kind of buddy approach to Trump. Whether it'll work, we'll have to see because he's still leading Germany, which is not Trump's favorite country.
For a number of reasons. Yes. I mean, I have to say that the list is long. Is there anything that Germany needs to do, if not day one, day two, to try not to be in the firing line of Donald Trump?
I mean, look, Merz already started with his kind of really strong rhetoric about migration and also kind of following the Trump line of I'm going to do this on day one, even though that's not really how things work in Germany. And so you see that already. He's gonna be Trumpish on migration. He's probably going to also be Trump-ish, let's say, on economics and say, yeah, you're right, Germany is underperforming. We need to strengthen our economy and perform better. So these are good things. These are good approaches. But, can he change the trade balance, which is what Donald Trump wants him to do? That'll be more difficult.
That certainly will be more difficult. Eric, I feel everything we've heard, actually, from the CDU and from Friedrich Merz seems he wants to move quickly. He understands that time is of the essence, that he wants to be a coalition. They're looking at the numbers. Do you think that it will be faster or quicker to be a coalition just by his sheer will of getting it done?
Yeah, I think that's a good start, right? To have somebody say, let's get this thing done as quickly as possible, but a coalition by definition is a combination of two. Yeah, it's messy. So and as we talked about before, if whoever is going to would lead the negotiation from the Social Democrats, they know that they are in a strong position. They're the only one, right? So you're going to demand a lot, right? And he won't like it, right? So and if I may say also I share your I want to share your optimism on his approach to Donald Trump. I'm not optimistic. I think Trump it's impossible to negotiate with a man, right? I mean, at the end of the day, he doesn't like Europe. He doesn't like Germany. He doesn't really care about this place, right? And he wants Germany to stop exporting stuff, if you will, and yes, he may do something on immigration, although it's an EU issue. It's a little bit difficult for him to do, but. Does Donald Trump really care about immigrants into Germany? I mean, I think it's one of these. Yeah, exactly.
He doesn't care about the policy, but the vibe.
Yeah, okay.
Right. Elon Musk seems to care, right? And there's that link with Alex Fiedel. But I guess the difficult question is that this is an economy that has stagnating growth. They're going into tough negotiations on Ukraine with Russia, and then you have this global trade war specter from Donald Trump.
Yeah.
In what order will they tackle these three massive issues?
I mean, the good thing is the first step in all of these cases is Europe. So to deal with the Ukraine issue and what Europe is going to have to do to secure Ukraine or to help Ukraine position itself better in a ceasefire negotiation, the answer to that is Europe. Same with trade negotiations, right? Germany alone, I mean, A, it doesn't have the competency to do trade policy by itself, but B, it's just a lot stronger if it's speaking with all of Europe behind it. So that's going to be the movement for Friedrich Merz to help Europe come up with its own strong negotiating position, and then you see what happens with Trump.
What does the industrial sector need here, Eric? I mean, from an economic point of view, they need to get consumption back up. Yeah. They need to get industrials to start investing and spending. Yeah.
So I think it's from a macro point of view, it's quite simple. Germany has had this model of being an export-leading country. That is over because there is all this pressure on putting it. How do you get rid of a trade surplus? By either lowering your export or expanding domestic demand. This goes back to Mario Draghi's report, that the way that we invest here is that we take these 2.5% in Germany, 6-7% of GDP in current account surplus. This is savings we send abroad. We bring them in. The way you do it is you boost domestic demand, consumption, but most importantly, investment. Yeah. Private investment and public investment. And that's how he cannot get around the issue of the debt brake. And he cannot, I think, get around the need for a banking union or a capitalized union that can allocate this money so it doesn't get invested abroad, but in domestic. So you have to find a way of creating incentives for the business sector to invest, and if you want, in the sectors you decide, technology and other something. So this approach is now industrial policies which Germans don't like, right? So,
Eric, we're just seeing actually Euro open, so it's always good to mention Euro 104.85. I mean, it's rising really a touch, but if you look at German stocks, they were pretty much on a tear in the lead up to the election, because I think there was maybe an expectancy in the market that there would be some kind of conservative, social democrats majority in parliament, which looks like it's possible, but again, economic reforms would have to have any potential loosening of strict borrowing rules, and that's when we go to the debt brake.
Yeah. I mean, but also, when you talk about the market, so American stocks have not done well since Donald Trump came in compared to Europe. I mean, but part of that is that the market is starting to realize that Donald Trump's policies are not good for value creation. It's too random. It's too, it's fundamental. And Europe was cheap, right?
You could argue that it was also priced in, right, in the lead up to
there's been a lot of that also. But and just in parallel to this, European equities were very, very cheap in normal valuation terms. And then you see, okay, so the world is not going crazy at the end of the day, and the Germans will get a new government that's probably a little bit more business friendly or something. Yeah. So then suddenly you have the momentum.
Rachel, the big tail risk, I think, for Euro was also the prospect of the AfD outperforming, which hasn't really come to fruition.
Yeah, exactly. Look, it's shocking. The AfD is nearly 20%, which is a doubling from the last result, but it's a priced-in shock, as you said. We've known for some months that that's what we expected, and many were worried that it was going to be closer to 25, and it wasn't. So that's a big sigh of relief, strangely, right? Still they're the biggest winner in terms of outperforming last time's election, but They're not strong enough. For example, if the AfD had been stronger, would it have been more tempting for Merz if that's the only two-party coalition that might have been possible? Now that's not on the table, so I think there's a lot of relief about that.
Rachel, how do you think the AfD's policies will influence Friedrich Merz? Again, she's very close to Elon Musk. She's been, extremely tough on immigration.
Yeah.
Does that bring him more to the right, or does that change after the election results?
No, I mean, it's a great position for the AfD to be in because Merz is going to have to be in a coalition with left of center, either one left of center party or two left of center parties, meaning he won't be able to get all of the right-wing policies through, like on migration, that he might like. And that's going to leave the opening for AfD and Alice Weidel to remain, very critical. And also because, it's hard to work magic and solve a war in 3 days or, even if they manage this investment and they release the debt brake, which is, this is a big deal. The CDU wouldn't have considered loosening the debt brake a few years ago. So these are really big things. They could do these big investments, but it takes time before anybody can actually see the results. And that time is time that the AfD can use.
Okay, thank you both for joining us. Eric Nielsen, Chief Economics Advisor at UniCredit, Rachel Tassenfreund, the Senior Research Fellow at the German Council on Foreign Relations. Now, we'll have plenty more, of course. We'll go back to AfD headquarters here in Berlin. We'll count the numbers. The night is young. We're going through the numbers as the votes are being counted, but we're looking at coalition building and policy going forward. This is Bloomberg.
Bloomberg Invest is back. Join me, Shonali Basak, and the industry's most influential people for a comprehensive view across financial markets. Hear what a second Donald Trump presidency means for the economy, how AI is being monetized by investors, and the next big risks facing the private credit industry. Bloomberg Invest, March 4th and 5th in New York City. Register your interest to attend at bloomberglive.com/invest.
AI, how it has penetrated pretty much all sectors, including music. AI can write music, compose music. How do you see AI changing the landscape in fashion?
Yeah, AI definitely helped. When I did the jewelry, I used the AI, helping me to give some idea. But ultimately, you still have to do a lot with it. They just give you very superficial ideas, but at the end, you still have to customize and how to really make it and do that. I do not think that AI and the technology can replace the human mind at this moment.
Yeah. Are you concerned one day we won't be able to differentiate designs by AI and designs by an actual designer?
I don't know. For me, I feel that, when the designer is doing, it's the spirit, it's the heart that the computer don't have.
Bloomberg brings you breaking news 24 hours a day, powered by 2,900 journalists and analysts in more than 150 offices across the globe. Bloomberg Television. Context changes everything.
David Weston, join me for the next generation of Wall Street Week, telling stories of capitalism from business, markets, economics, tech, and climate. Each week, we'll go on the road for a look at what lies behind the headlines of today and what will likely be the headlines tomorrow.
Above all else, it's a mission.
Done nothing but grow immensely. To me, that's an extraordinary sign.
We can be the change that we want to see.
Watch the all-new Wall Street Week. More than what you need to know, it's what you need to think about.
Welcome back, everyone, to our special coverage of the German election results live from Berlin. Now, Bloomberg's Stephen Carroll joins us from the AfD headquarters in Berlin. Stephen, we heard, of course, from Alice Weidel. I think she was the first one to speak as soon as the polls closed or a couple of minutes afterwards. What's the mood like at headquarters, and what's the way forward for AfD?
Well, look, it was a bit of a bumpy moment after the exit poll results were published because it wasn't quite the heights that some of the polls have predicted before this vote. But the supporters that were gathered here, and there weren't a huge number of them, it has to be said, did react very positively, of course, when Alice Weidel did speak to the crowd, saying that, you know, they're open to an offer of going into government and that if they don't get it, they'll be expecting to overtake the CDU and CSU at the next election. And that's really what the focus has been here, is on the point after the elections as well, because this is going to be something that is very closely watched by the the electorate here as well, and that this is something that will be in focus for party politics. Sure, I'll just have to leave you.
I think Stephen's being moved. So while
colleagues are being.
Okay, Stephen, I'm going to let you move. I think it always happens on election night in a big. I think some of the reporters want to see the TV, so we'll let you move a little bit to the left so that you clear the view. But again, Chad Thomas, who of course oversees, our executive editor for Europe, who oversees all of our election coverage, is here. It was very interesting for me listening to Friedrich Merz basically saying that he aims to form a government as soon as possible after sealing, the victory today, but also saying the world out there will not wait for us and won't wait for lengthy coalition discussions. So there's a will, there's a way to go forward. How soon could we get some kind of government?
So he definitely wants to claim the chancellery as quickly as he can. The question is, who can he get to form a government with him to do that? The coalition negotiations typically play out over weeks and months. What people need to remember who are watching is that they actually have a formal contract that they sign that lays out how they're going to work together in a coalition over the next 4 years. And that's why that process usually takes a long time. Now, given the moment that we're in, the world isn't going to wait months for Germany to come together with a new coalition. So it'll be interesting to see if he can get others to go along with this idea that they have to move quickly. When you were at the Munich Security Conference and I was helping with that coverage, there did seem to be among a lot of the political elite in Germany a sense that they realized that they were in a moment.
Chad, hold that thought, because I also want to ask you about the AfD, but let's go straight to Oliver Krug, who's standing by with a very important guest at CDU.
Yeah, that's right, Francine. Thank you so much. We're very pleased to be joined by Jens Spahn right now, just off the heels of that victory of Friedrich Merz and the CDU. First, just to get your reaction to what we got this evening for the CDU.
Well, we do have a very clear mandate. Friedrich Merz will be our next chancellor in Germany. Olaf Scholz is done. And that's the good news of tonight. And we're going to change course of Germany. We will bring back growth. We will end illegal migration. We will meet our security needs, especially regarding to NATO goals. So, yes, that's a clear mandate for a change of policies.
And with whom will you do all these things in a coalition?
Well, that's a special thing about Germany. We need to talk now, negotiate about a possible coalition. We do have this 5% threshold. Perhaps it will take till tomorrow morning till we really know how Parliament will look like. The most important question is, to all possible potential partners, do we have the same approach, the same view on what happened today on this result? That there is a huge loss of trust. I mean, AfD, the right-wing extremists, have doubled their share of the votes, and that shows we need to restore trust, especially when it comes to illegal migration. And the question to Social Democrats, to Greens, to all possible partners potential partners is, do we have this same view? That is the message of the voters. We need to end illegal migration. If that is the case, we're going to see very quick negotiations.
And going into these negotiations, for you and for the CDU, what are the red lines? What are the things you're absolutely unwilling to compromise on?
Well, we start the other way around. What is necessary for Germany to do? And that is to bring back growth after 2 years of recession, to bring unemployment down again, to close the borders for illegal migration. And then, that is new of the last 4 weeks, the next chancellor, when he goes to The Hague in June, to the NATO summit, he will need to show actually to our transatlantic partners that Germany is committed to the 2% goal and that we're going to fulfill it into the 30s with our financial planning. That will be one of the first important tasks for the new government.
And one of the many challenges facing Friedrich Merz will be sitting in the White House right now in the form of Donald Trump. What do you think the approach of this new government could be to Donald Trump, especially in light of what we've heard and what we've learned about Trump's presidency this time around over the last few weeks?
Well, I'm very sure Friedrich Merz and Donald Trump will get along very well. Olaf Scholz, our current chancellor, was just seen as a lame duck in D.C. No one really took him serious, and that's going to change. Friedrich Merz has a long personal history of a transatlantic relationship, and I'm very sure the first time the two met, the president and the new chancellor, they will get along well personally, and that's then a good base to make deals these days, is it called, to negotiate and to find solutions regarding China, for example, that we do more transatlantic trade perhaps and both less with China, common approach towards China, that we do invest more in our security. I'm very sure we can find common grounds, though it might be difficult in some questions.
Jens Spahn, thank you so much for your time. Greatly appreciate it, and congratulations this evening.
Thank you.
There you hear from one of the senior lawmakers of the CDU for his priorities heading into this new government, being headed likely by Friedrich Merz, informing hopefully in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, a great interview, trying to, of course, understand what their thinking is. It was, for me, very interesting to see that he was really focused on immigration. We'll get back to Ollie shortly from CDU headquarters here in Berlin. But let's also get back to Chad Thomas, who's our executive editor for Europe. Chad, again, I mean, Jens Spahn is a heavyweight, actually, in this party. He's been, former minister twice, once for health, one for finance ministry. For me, it was a bit of a break from what we've heard him in the past go so hard on immigration.
Yeah, and he was one of the people in the party under Merkel who was also trying to pull the party a bit to the right. So obviously he's more aligned with Friedrich Merz now in what he's doing. The CDU knows that immigration was a really important topic for voters, for many the most important topic, and domestic security. We had another incident here in Berlin just on Friday night, which just brought it back to the forefront for voters when these incidents keep happening in Germany with attacks and so on. And so they know that they need to move forward with some sort of plan there. If they're going to try and do that with the Social Democrats, that's going to potentially be difficult, because the Social Democrats, while they also have definitely toughened on immigration, on border security and so on, you've seen that already under Scholz, their views are different. So that's already one of the sticking points you might see in potential coalition negotiations.
So, Chad, exit polls and early vote projections show the opposition Conservatives under Friedrich Merz are set to win the German vote with a defeat for the Chancellor, of course, Olaf Scholz, and his Social Democrats. We're also just hearing from business lobbies that are now speaking out either with statements or reporters, your team, are reaching out to them. And German business lobby BDI is on the same page as the industrial union IG. Both are calling for Friedrich Merz to form a coalition government fast and without the far-right AfD. Can he do that? Do a coalition fast without AfD and maybe a two-party coalition?
He can do it fast if he can get the Social Democrats to go along with him. That would be the fastest option for him, if that's possible. We're still waiting to see how the numbers play out this evening, whether the numbers add up to do that. We had the Social Democrats holding their press conference about an hour or so ago, and one of the leaders of the Social Democrats was saying that you can renew yourself both in the opposition and also within the government. So they were already opening the door to the idea that they very likely may be in the next government. They also talked about changes within the party leadership. That potentially can help. Olaf Scholz said he won't be part of any negotiations. So there are signs coming from the Social Democrats that they are opening the door to potential negotiations with the Christian Democrats.
Eric Nielsen reminded us that actually coalitions in Germany never come quickly, even with two parties. It feels like the sense of urgency we heard from Friedrich Merz tonight at that speech at CDU headquarters maybe change. How quickly can a coalition actually take place?
The issue is, do the Social Democrats want that coalition so quickly? The negotiating tactic that they have is to hold out, to get as many things as they can and as many ministries as they can before they sign up to that coalition. So it depends on how much is Merz willing to give them. Do they feel like they've gotten enough in order to go into the government? So and also what is fast for Germany might not be fast for the rest of the world. For the Germans, they may be thinking, we will get something done in weeks. I heard someone talking about Easter. In my mind, I was thinking Easter, the whole world could have changed. Look at how quickly things are moving with Ukraine. So what their version of fast is and what the rest of the world is hoping for could be potentially two different things.
I mean, for the moment, I think the business community will probably be assured this was the best case scenario for them, which is the possibility of a two-party coalition, reforms, debt break, and things that would be, I guess, more friendly to businesses.
And the Social Democrats, they want to spend money. They're saying that Germany needs renewal, that they want to spend money on things like infrastructure. They want to potentially, there's discussion about setting up a defense fund. All of these things mean that the taps get opened up a little bit, stimulating the economy. Those are all things that would be obviously beneficial to business. What does the market not want to see? The protracted negotiations where it's unclear what sort of government that you have. The other potential thing that we might see play out is that the Social Democrats with Scholz as the chancellor for the moment, that they try to push some things through the Bundestag before that new government actually comes into place, things that they feel are urgent. Those are all the discussions that we'll be watching in the next couple of days to see how that plays out with Scholz and Merz and the relationship between the two of them in this interim period.
Yeah, it's going to be a busy couple of days. I'm also looking forward in 45 minutes, then you have all the leaders of the major parties that are debating each other, which is something that I don't think any other country in Europe does. We'll get back to that in a second, but let's also go to Kriti Gupta, who's at SPD headquarters in Berlin. And Kriti, the focus is now on SPD. Do they want to go in a coalition? Do they have the votes? What kind of red lines do they have in going at it with Friedrich Merz?
Absolutely. I mean, we're still waiting for what the coalition starting point might actually be. Francine, we've been talking to some of the members on the ground here, and even they don't know where they want to start. We do know, of course, that Boris Pistorius is expected to be the key figure, the key party leader for the SPD moving forward in terms of whether or not these coalition talks can come to fruition. And we also know that in his about 1.5 years since he's been the Minister of Defense, one of the key priorities has been, of course, modernizing the German army and the German military and getting those resources. Whether or not that is perhaps the starting point, given that the last time we even floated these conversations or even heard from Boris Pistorius, the big conversation there was, of course, where that funding actually comes from. It's also a place where he's gotten kind of carve-outs from the FDP, from Christian Lindner, for example, to really absolutely enact some of the moves to do that modernization. So there is a question here of whether defense ends up becoming the key starting point, given that Friedrich Merz over at the CDU is also prioritizing that. And of course, given the conversation we've heard from the Munich Security Conference and Donald Trump's rhetoric since, that seems to be certainly a higher priority than perhaps even the debt break conversations that we heard just a few weeks ago.
Kriti, what's the mood like at headquarters? Again, we had really quite I would say a speech that was quite touching from Olaf Scholz. I mean, he took the blame from what happened.
He took the blame. He absolutely fell on his sword to try to move the SPD forward. You heard from the party leaders, Lars Klingbeil and Saskia Esken as well, talking about him fighting like a lion, but that ultimately that the SPD is due for new personnel changes. Francine, I'm not going to lie to you, the mood here is quite grim, just given that, of course, this has been the biggest defeat for the SPD since before World War II. But there is still a very much an optimism in that they are looking to start those coalition talks. They just don't know what that starting point is. That's something we're going to hear from, hopefully, in the next few weeks, if not months.
Okay, Kriti, thanks so much. We'll go back to Kriti Gupta, of course, at SPD headquarters in Berlin a little bit later on. But Chad, let's talk about the smaller the smaller parties. Now, there does seem to be a small discrepancy between the projection from the two public broadcasters,
yes,
and that is ARD and ZDF, on whether the Free Democrats and BSW will meet the 5% threshold. And of course, if they get seats, coalitions will be more difficult to put together.
Yeah, and if you're the Christian Democrats, we just got some new projections from ARD, one of the public broadcasters. Their numbers have softened a little bit. They're now at 28.8. That It's already very close whether the Social Democrats and the Christian Democrats have enough seats, just those two parties, to form a coalition. And the more the support for those parties potentially softens in terms of the actual seats as the evening goes on, the harder that math gets. And as you said, we have both the Liberals, the Free Democrats, and the BSW. That is a party that was formed just within the last year. Yeah. From someone on the far left who's very well known in Germany. And both of those parties are on the cusp of getting into the parliament. If they get in, then the math is very unlikely to still add up for a two-party coalition between the Social Democrats and the Christian Democrats. That means you're going to need three parties to form a majority. That means maybe they have to bring the Greens in, or you need to bring the Liberals in. The Liberals and the Social Democrats, there's a lot of bad blood between them over their time together in the last coalition government and how that all blew up, as we all remember, last November. So it becomes much more difficult to see how you form that government, in particular, how you form a government quickly.
But Chad, to be clear, so turnout was very good. It's actually been one of the strongest, I think, in the last couple of decades. It also seems that the underlying current is actually extreme parties with Die Linke have done maybe better than expected. So how do you break down how people voted?
I think what we're seeing is a fragmentation here in German politics. Germany, for a very long time in the post-war period, the Western Germany was dominated by the Social Democrats, the Christian Democrats, and the FDP, and it was those three parties. Now we potentially have 6, 7 parties in the parliament, and with that fragmentation, it becomes much more difficult to govern. And that is what we're seeing here playing out tonight. And we had high voter turnout, as you said. That's great for the democracy, and it's the highest turnout since reunification. So clearly, voters see that things are on a knife edge here, both from an economic point of view and sort of what's happening around them in the rest of the world.
Chad, thank you so much. Of course, our executive editor for Europe, Chad Thomas, stays with us. We'll continue our German election 2025 special. We also talked to the director of the Center on the United States and Europe at the Brookings Institute. That's next, and this is Bloomberg.
Africa, a region rife with potential for growth and opportunities, but not without its challenges. Bloomberg highlights the biggest stories, interviewing key players, and reporting on the issues impacting the region. Join us as we get to the heart of African business, politics, and economics, and ask the question, what's next? I'm Jennifer Zabasaja, and this is Next Africa.
Premieres February 28th, only on Bloomberg.
It's a multi-trillion-dollar industry. We'll show you what's happening in ETFs like no one else. ETF IQ, Mondays on Bloomberg.
What is the issue between the type of information that's being collected by investors and the marking issue that you're describing?
But what mark-to-market assets do is it forces honesty into the situation. We're talking right after the DeepSeek model surprised everybody in its efficiency. It took hundreds of billions off of market caps because it legitimately raised concerns that maybe the future of AI was different. I guarantee you that if you look at other portfolios that aren't marked, they didn't move. If private assets are going to eat the world, as they say, with the equity market halving in the number of names, you come to a world that is increasingly an echo chamber. Imagine you have a firm that has some public assets and some private assets. If you see your public assets in AI going down by 20%, you're going to be thinking very, very deeply about what your private assets are worth differently than someone who just has the latter.
US tech is influencing global markets.
Technology is driving business across Europe.
Companies in Asia are betting on tech.
Everyone to our special coverage of the German election results live from Berlin. Now, this is what we know so far. So here's a catch-up of what we found out over the last hour and 41 minutes. Now, Germany's center-right conservative opposition under Friedrich Merz won the election as projected, with the far-right Alternative for Germany roughly doubling its share of the vote in second place with the number of seats at 143. Now, these are seat projections. We were giving you actually percentage points just a short while ago. The Chancellor Olaf Scholz's Social Democrats crashed to their worst results since World War II in third, and then you can see the Greens fourth with 96 projected seats. Now, Merz does seem to be in pole position, of course, to replace Olaf Scholz as Chancellor, but he will need at least one coalition partner to secure a parliamentary majority. The ones that also won quite big, or certainly more than expected, is the left Die Linke with about 63 seats. Well, 63, and that's around 8.6% of the votes. Now, Bloomberg's Stephen Carroll joins us now from the AfD headquarters in Berlin. Stephen, I guess it's a mixture of disappointment, but also they doubled their votes since the last election for AfD. What are they thinking tonight? What's the mood like at headquarters?
Yeah, I mean, look, pretty jubilant now. You can see you can probably hear they're watching some of the other speeches from the FDP at the moment here, among those members who are still here and taking part in the celebrations. The historic success, as Alice Weidel called it earlier in her speech, that is something that is going to be something the party is very proud of, although it didn't quite reach the heights of what some opinion polls were predicting ahead of this election. And what they're saying, they're open to talks if Friedrich Merz wants to call for a coalition. Now, we know that's not going to happen, but very much the focus here is then on the next election and what this party can do to convert its jump in popularity, almost doubling since the last election, into how it can prepare to, and what Alice Weidel has laid out as her ambition, to overtake the CDU in the next election as well. Of course, this party is going to be, by the looks of things, the biggest opposition party in the Bundestag. Then it's a question of what influence they'll have on policy, particularly around issues of migration. We know that the AfD drove that, was part of responsible for driving that to the centre of this election campaign as well. And look, also people here are happy with, you mentioned it earlier, Elon Musk's support for the party. I was talking to one of AfD member here who said he was here when the party was founded and said that he's seen an influx of members since Elon Musk's vocal support, and the party feels they have the wind behind them with Donald Trump in the White House as well. So plenty to celebrate here, even if there is some measures for disappointment at the AfD headquarters as well. Of course, they'll now be looking to see how they're going to leverage that position in opposition in the Bundestag.
Stephen, thank you so much. Stephen Carroll there at the AfD headquarters in Berlin. Now let's go to the CDU with the kingmaker at the moment. Oliver Crook joins us from headquarters. Ollie, when you look at Friedrich Merz and his options, now look, if the business-friendly Free Democrats and the far-left PSW fail to reach that 5% threshold for getting seats in the Bundestag, then Merz could just form a coalition with the SPD. Otherwise, he'll need an extra partner. So what's the thinking at CDU right now?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, everyone that we've spoken to so far in our interviews here is that basically what they would like to see, obviously, is a quick resolution to these coalition negotiations. They would like the fewest number of coalition partners possible. You know, maybe that's the SPD, but we were just chatting with Jens Spahn, who's a senior member of the CDU. You'll remember him as a health minister under Merkel, briefing the press every single day. Has really come up as a prominent member in the party, saying that his priorities are what we've heard from a lot of CDU members here, which is basically getting the economy back on track, getting an economic package pushed through through very quickly. Immigration has not gone away. This is not necessarily, from what we're hearing now, just a sort of campaign trail issue. This is something that they want to push ahead on to restrict migration considerably. But again, one of the points that he made was that basically we need to see what the other parties, how they interpret these results, because they see the CDU that is clearly themselves as the winners in this. They see themselves as wanting to really dictate the terms. The question is, though, whether or not that is going to be the case. In a certain way, the SPD has very little to lose, despite the fact that they did so poorly. But they're going to potentially want to hold on to some of their sort of key principles. So I don't think there are very sort of obvious coalition negotiations ahead. Again, as you've been pointing out for the last sort of hour and a half or so, this will all come down to not who got the most votes, but who got the least votes. If the FDP and Sarah Wagenknecht manage to make it into the Bundestag and basically rewrite the entire electoral arithmetic for these coalition parties, this is going to be the big question. But again, the CDU coming here with the message that they are victorious, they want to be able to push their agenda forward, and they want to get a sort of economic proposal through as soon as possible.
Ollie, thanks so much. Oliver Kirk, they're at headquarters of the CDU in Berlin now to try and understand, of course, coalition building and some of the talks that will continue. Let's get back to Chad Thomas, who is in charge of our Europe coverage. Chad, again, there's going to be a lot of negotiation, and I imagine that everyone at CDU is just going through the state broadcasters to try and understand the numbers, because those couple of seats make a huge difference on who they can form a government with.
Yeah, everyone is watching very closely. Does the BSW, this far-left party, and or the FDP get into parliament? Because if they do, then the math just doesn't add up for that two-party coalition. And then they're going to need a third partner, whether that is then the Free Democrats or it's the Greens. The Greens looks like would be one that would be pretty difficult given the tone of the campaign, the fact that they were attacking Habeck as being an inefficient economy minister, and they've never been in a government with one another together as well. On the other hand, you and I were talking about this a little bit ago, the Social Democrats and the FDP, there's no love lost between those two parties after their government together, the one that is on its way out now. So if they have to have three parties in this government, it gets pretty tricky.
Chad, let's also go to Washington. Joining us now is Constance Stelzenmüller, director of the Center on the United States and Europe at the Brookings Institutions. Constance, thank you for joining us. No matter who builds the government or what kind of coalition, will Donald Trump try and bulldoze and I guess maybe humiliate Germany?
I don't know. You'd have to ask somebody else that.
Okay, what do you think the negotiations, when you look at the coalitions, what kind of change do you think it will mean for the U.S. and Germany relationship going forward?
Well, the U.S. government, the Vice President of the United States, and Elon Musk have both made it very clear that they would prefer the anti-system party, extreme right party, AfD, to govern Germany. That's not going to happen because the winner of these elections has formally excluded that, as have all other German democratic parties. So it's anybody's guess how they will react to that, but they, I don't think, are going to get what they would like.
So what happens, again, the Europeans need, and I think you've repeated this many times, need a strong Germany. Given the results so far in Germany, do you think we'll get a stronger Germany than we've seen so far?
I think that depends. Germany faces a multitude of problems, a number of them self-inflicted, and they're on multiple fronts: domestic, economic, and a very dark foreign and security geostrategic landscape. Right now, it looks as though, based on the current prognoses, the CDU's results are under 30%. That's a real disappointment and will undercut Merz's legitimacy. He had hoped for something clearly above 30%. Then there's the question already mentioned by your colleagues, whether the Liberals will get back in or not, and whether Merz has to form a three-party coalition or a two-party coalition. That also could make governing more difficult, especially since this short but nasty election campaign was marked by some really, I think many German voters, including me, thought unnecessary mutual vilifications among parties that are going to have to be partners with each other one way or the other.
Constance, can you give me a sense of Trump 2.0 seems to be very different. I know we're just over the 100 days, but it seems very different, more organized, wants his way, certainly when it comes to foreign policy, to the first time round. What is the right way of Europe to deal with that?
I think the right way is to not let ourselves be split by the Chinese, by the Russians, or by this American administration. I think you will see in the coming week, the coming 10 days, a number of European efforts at coordinating policy and at making sure that on the key issues of Europe's economic and political survival, we are on the same lines. And it's unfortunate that this administration appears to express a strong preference for the German hard right, and presumably also for other hard rights in Europe. But that is still a minoritarian position in Europe, and is not unlike what the administration had suggested, as it were, the true will of the people. In Germany, if the prognoses remain correct, 80% of voters have voted against the hard right, and at an extraordinarily high, historically high voter participation rate of 84%. There is no lack of clarity there.
Constance, thank you so much for joining us. Constance Stelzenmüller, there, director of the Center on the United States and Europe at the Brookings Institution. So let's get back to Oliver Crook, who joins us from CDU headquarters in Berlin. Again, Ollie, the focus is frankly on the smaller, of course, parties and whether the CDU will be able to do a two-party coalition or not.
Absolutely, and that's really sort of the focus for many of the lawmakers that we spoke to this evening, that basically they wouldn't really want to get into the sort of who they'd be willing to work with or not, because basically until we know the arithmetic, these are all sort of moot conversations. But I think it's worth just taking a moment here and just thinking about kind of where we have been on this political trip for the Germans. This sort of when the Olaf Scholz pulled the plug on his government back on November 5th, Francine, was the same day that Donald Trump was elected president of the United States, and now we are sort of marching towards this sort of decisive moment now with the CDU likely to be back in the Chancellery, back into the Chancellery for, I believe, the fifth time since the sort of turn of the century. This has been a CDU sort of dominated couple of decades, and this sort of SPD blip, we will say, was not even a full term of 3 years, with Olaf Scholz expiring early as it did. And now the question is, will they be able to work the CDU with the SPD, and sort of where are the kind of red lines going to lie? And again, I think the point that we keep hearing from everybody here and all the commentators is that time is not on the side of Germany. We've had 2 consecutive years of economic contraction. If you get tariffs from the United States, that will basically guarantee a third year of contraction. So for these CDU members who have won this election and have won it pretty decisively, though perhaps not by exactly the margin they would have hoped for, 29% is a little bit lower than what they were hoping for at 30, 31%, maybe giving them not such a strong hand. Their priority is going to hit the ground running and really get some of these proposals through, namely on the economic proposals, the economic package, and of course immigration, which has been sort of the main protagonist in terms of the issues of this campaign trail leading up to this election today.
Let's also go to Kriti Gupta, who's at SPD headquarters in Berlin. Kriti, do we know that they're ready to enter in coalition talks?
We don't know. We don't know not only whether or not they're ready to enter, but who they're ready to enter with, because, of course, we still are waiting on what their actual stance is on the likes of the FDP, given the fallout with Christian Lindner. We're waiting for their stance on the Greens, of course, their relationship with Robert Habeck as well. So there is a question, of course, of what kind of partnership they're looking for, as well as who within the party could potentially be up for even taking a cabinet position if Friedrich Merz were to have them. So certainly Boris Pistorius is the name of the night here in the SPD, and he is the current Minister of Defense, so what his future looks like, but several others of Olaf Scholz's cabinet. If he himself is not going to be in Friedrich Merz's cabinet, who else within the SPD can be, and how does that change priorities? We know the economics is a key one. We also know that the defense is a key one, and of course, as Ollie was saying earlier, how this all ties in to the reciprocal tariffs that you may get from Donald Trump and what role Germany has in that, also while balancing the relationship out of Brussels with Ursula von der Leyen. That's the conversation that everyone is having tonight, from Boris Pistorius to the party leader Lars and Saskia as well.
Kriti, thanks so much. Kriti Gupta there at SPD headquarters in Berlin. Now, in the last couple of minutes, Donald J. Trump, the President of the United States of America, took to social media, Truth Social, saying it looks like the Conservative Party in Germany has won the very big and highly anticipated election. This is just the latest. I think there's other, of course, comments from the President that's coming out. Let's get back to Chad Thomas. I mean, of course, the CDU also outperformed what is expected. So if Friedrich Merz has a legitimacy of building a coalition, I don't know whether now he seems to also have the support of the President of the United States.
Yeah, so he goes on to say that this is a great day for Germany. Obviously, he's happy when he sees a Conservative Party winning the election. So potentially this is a bit of a reset for the German-U.S. relationship. Although President Trump is likely to not forget that there's a big gap between Germany and the U.S. when it comes to exports, and that is something that he's likely to come back to in the future. He's obsessed with the German car industry. He talks about it quite often, so maybe there's a bit of a honeymoon here between the two, but we have to see how that's going to play out in the coming weeks and months.
Chad, thank you so much. Our Bloomberg Europe executive editor, Chad Thomas. It's been a fun 2 hours trying to figure out exactly what kind of coalition building will have the German Conservatives sealing this election, when the far right coming in second. Now, that's it for the coverage of the German election on TV, but of course we have much more on our Top Live blog. Just type TLIV Go on the terminal, or you can find it on our website. That's it for our special coverage of the German election result. Tune in tomorrow morning for our continued coverage of market reaction as well. In 15 minutes, the German leaders' debate happens.